now call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 45, the House of Commons Standing Committee on Fisheries and Ocean. This meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of June 23, 2022. Before we proceed, I would like to make a few comments for the benefit of witnesses and members. Please wait until I recognise you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either Floor, English or French. For those in the room, of course, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. Please address all comments through the chair. Finally, a reminder that screenshots or taking photos of your screen is not permitted. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. In accordance with the committee's routine motion concerning connection tests for witnesses, I am informing the committee that all witnesses have completed the required connection test in advance of the meeting. There is one that hasn't joined yet, and that test will be done if they do join. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted on October 4, 2022, the committee is resuming its study of the impacts of climate change. I would like to welcome our first panel of witnesses. Representing the Fish, Food and Allied Workers, Unifor, Sherry Glenn, Inshore Representative, and representing the Prince Edward Island Aquaculture Alliance, Mr. Peter Warris, I think good, Director, Projects and Industry Liaison. Thank you for taking the time to appear today. You will each have up to 5 minutes for an opening statement. I would invite Ms. Glenn to begin, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On behalf of over 13,000 of our members from Newfoundland and Labrador, thank you for the opportunity to address the honourable members today. The Fish, Food and Allied Workers Union represents every inshore harvester in our province, encompassing approximately 3,000 owner-operator enterprises and their crews. Our scope of membership also includes workers in fish processing plants, marine transportation, metal fabrication, hospitality and brewing across the province. FFAW acknowledges and appreciates Prime Minister Trudeau's visit to the community of Port aux Basques to see firsthand the level of destruction from Hurricane Fiona, and we welcome the announcement of the $300 million recovery fund for impacted Atlantic Canadians. This fund, to be distributed over 2 years to assist with the rebuilding of federal and community infrastructure in PEI, Nova Scotia, and Newfoundland and Labrador, will be quickly exhausted given the scale of repair and replacement required across all 3 provinces. In addition, as climate change continues to make ocean conditions and the nature of storm systems increasingly volatile, coastal infrastructure must not only be repaired, but improved upon to withstand future challenges. Due to the time-sensitive nature of our industry, the uncertainty of the timelines for completing this work is of great concern. So in the hours and days following Fiona, our union began getting reports from harvesters in Burgeo, Lapoille, Rose Blanche, Fox Roost, Port aux Basques, and all the other communities on the southwest coast about the degree of destruction that was happening in their area. We started talking to the Provincial Department of Justice and Public Safety, Fisheries and Oceans Canada, and the Atlantic Canada Opportunities Agency on compensation plans and application forms. And just 1 week after the storm, we were on the ground in the affected communities, beginning the process of documenting losses and applying for compensation. In total, we are assisting 37 harvesters through the Disaster Financial Assistance Arrangements Program through that application process. Those 37 harvesters have lost almost 40 stages, 30 wharves, 8 slipways, and 3 fishing vessels. Those stages were filled with lobster pots, halibut and cod trawl, nets, deep freezes, haulers, generators, grapnels, rope floats, and everything else needed to operate a fishing enterprise. With the fishing season just a handful of months away, harvesters are facing serious questions, not the least of which is the financial burden of rebuilding. Where will the money come from? Will it come in time? Where and how to rebuild? Fishing infrastructure is naturally along the shoreline, but harvesters are wondering how to rebuild in a way that makes their infrastructure more resilient. In some cases, the shoreline itself has changed significantly, making it impossible to rebuild in the same location. Harvesters are concerned about the impact the storm will have on their lobster fishery next season. As DFO pointed out in their infamous tweet, lobsters were hurled ashore during the storm, and the damage done to the ocean bottom from wave energy and sedimentation is largely unknown at this point. In addition, hundreds of pots and nets were swept out to sea, and harvesters are concerned about the impact of this lost gear on fish resources. The FFAW is calling on the federal government to support the province of Newfoundland and Labrador to recover eligible expenses associated with damages and provide compensation specific to the fishing sector to ensure that professional assets are restored for the 2023 season. These 37 license holders and enterprises represent millions of dollars in revenue to a very rural and resource-dependent region of our province. In recent years, the Department of Fisheries and Oceans has invested millions in lost and derelict gear removal throughout Atlantic Canada, and our union has proudly contributed to this initiative. We recommend that investments in marine debris and gear removal be scaled up to swiftly remove lost gear from the marine ecosystem. A lot of uncertainty remains months after Fiona struck, but a couple of things are clear. First, disaster relief programs need to be at the ready and responsive to the needs of the fishing industry. Second, the federal government needs to invest in new storm-resilient infrastructure like breakwaters and reinforced wharves. And the time to act is now. The FFAW is positioned and prepared to expedite consultation on support programs and work with government to facilitate delivery of financial assistance. And make no mistake, without immediate concentrated economic support from all levels of government, the fishing industry on the southwest coast of the island is in jeopardy. I thank you for your time and attention to this really important issue this afternoon.
Thank you. We'll now go to Mr. Wars for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for everyone here for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Peter Warris. I'm the Director of Projects and Industry Liaison with the PEI aquaculture industry. Briefly, the aquaculture industry on PEI is a farming industry that produces seafood. It's not a fishery, and that's a key difference I want to highlight. PEI is the largest mussel producer in North America, and it's the largest oyster producer on the eastern shore of Canada. Our farmers have invested thousands of dollars in infrastructure for their leases, which cannot be removed prior to this type of storm. There are hundreds of lines and thousands of cages or socks on a farm. They can only be sunk to get them out of the way of this kind of weather. And obviously the animals that they are farming need to remain in the water in order to survive. Estimates for the damages to the aquaculture industry on PEI include mortality and loss of market-ready shellfish, which are going to cause immediate product shortages, reduced exports, and loss of income to the harvesters. Loss of mussel and oyster seed, which are the juvenile animals, which are our livestock for the next 2 to 4 years. Therefore, this impact is going to be carried forward and affect exports and potentially market share into the future. Lease infrastructure, which has been damaged or swept away, including ropes, buoys, anchors, cages, etc. Shore-based infrastructure has been damaged, buildings, launch points, wharves. Plus, for our land-based finfish farms, significant quantities of fuel needed to be used for their backup power generators, without which we would have seen much higher losses in terms of stock. Based on the feedback we've received so far in partnership with the province and DFO locally, we're estimating that at the moment we're looking at about $74 million in terms of damages. That's going to continue through the winter, and it'll probably be months before we have a final figure on that. A lot of gear is being sunk under the ice right now, or sunk ready for the ice to come in right now, and mortality might not be seen until the spring. So what does the aquaculture industry need in an immediate sense? Smaller farms hopefully will be covered under the existing provincial disaster financial assistance program, and we've been helping our members complete that application with the Red Cross. However, that program at the moment is capped at $200,000, and for many of those that's not high enough. We'd like to see that cap increased, potentially up to the full $2 million. The eligibility of the damages for compensation, replacement of lost and damaged gear and lease infrastructure, loss of market crop and of seed, and also the labour that's been involved in the clean-up and the cost of rebuilding. There's larger companies we have which are not eligible for the existing program because they have more than 20 employees, but they still suffered significant damages. So we would like to see a separate program being developed, possibly with a COA. Looking further into the future, there are no reasonable insurance programs available for the aquaculture sector at this time. And again, aquaculture is a farming industry, and our members need support the same as other Canadian farmers. And we would like to see those types of support led by Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, who understand farmers' needs, and potentially some suitable support programs such as business risk management already exist under the established Canadian Agricultural Partnership. So we'd like to see aquaculture being made eligible to participate in those types of programs. Another point is looking at the future planning. For a lot of the wharves and small craft harbours that were damaged, it's difficult to assess the future needs for those type of infrastructure when aquaculture vessels are not counted or considered currently under small craft harbours. They are not actually considered part of the core fleet, even though in many cases our members' boats are actually using those wharves more and for longer periods of time than the fishing vessels. So in order to know what Canada's future marine infrastructure needs are, everyone must be included as part of those consultations. So we'd like to see aquaculture vessels acknowledged as official users of small craft harbours. Thank you again for your time today.
Thank you. The third witness still hasn't joined by video conference, so we'll continue on with our questioning, and we'll start off with Mr. Small for 6 minutes or less, please.
Quick as that. Thank you,
Yeah, quick as
Mr.
that.
Chair.
Clock is run.
And thank you to the witnesses today. I'm going to start off with Mr. Warris. You made an interesting comment there about aquaculture not being considered an official user for small craft harbours. Do you think that's fair?
No. Sorry? No, not at all.
So, you mentioned that aquaculture would like to see a separate program developed with a COA. Could you give us a couple of sentences to describe exactly where you'd like that separate program to be headed?
I think that the program itself could be very similar to the existing program, the Provincial Disaster Financial Assistance Program. It just needs to be made eligible for the larger companies. I believe that the existing program is designed to address the needs of smaller companies, hence the limitation on, I think it's 20 employees or less, or $2 million in revenue. But obviously for some of our members, they don't fall within that. But the criteria of the damages that have been caused by the storm are basically very similar. It's just on a larger scale.
So what do you think could be done to help your industry better prepare for these types of weather events in the future?
I think there is a lot of work to be done in terms of looking at aquaculture in other parts of the world and other parts of Canada, in fact, as well, where farming is done in deeper waters, in rougher waters, and with heavier engineering. Obviously, building back better is something that we'd definitely like to see.
Okay. And you don't really know how much damage you have. You quoted 74 million. Where do you think that figure is going to end up, and what will you ultimately need to be able to survive and to continue in aquaculture in PEI?
I would hesitate to put an exact number on where I think that figure is going to end up. We have responses from about 85, I believe, members, so I could anticipate that to creep up around the 80 million mark, potentially. And in terms of what we need to survive, I think in the immediate sense, for a lot of our members, they have been completely devastated by this storm. We have lease infrastructure which is just basically gone, completely gone, and they need immediate financial support in order to redevelop those leases.
So, are you finding that the necessary resources are being made available to you in a timely fashion?
My understanding is that there's still some uncertainty as to what exactly is going to be covered by the program, and we are working through the process of helping our members with their Red Cross applications now. So I'm not aware of anyone actually completing that process as yet.
So how's the anxiety level amongst your industry there in PEI right now?
I think for some members it's fairly high, yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Mr. Chair, 2 minutes. Ms. Glynn, how's the application process moving along there with the harvesters that you represent?
Hi, thank you, Mr. Small. It's going reasonably well. Like I mentioned, we're moving through the DFFA process. I think by the end of the week we're going to have maybe 8 of the 37 ready to submit. If I'm getting too detailed, just please cut me off. But the stumbling block the biggest thing that we're facing with that program, a couple of things. The biggest one at this point being proving ownership for that infrastructure that's in that marine reserve space. So in that, I believe it's 15 meters from the high water mark, that nobody owns. So when you can't own it, you can't insure anything on that property or in that space. You also can't have any kind of a deed or title to that. So when it comes to proven ownership to avail of this funding, that has proven to be very difficult, and is something that we're working through. The province is certainly helping with that, but there's been a lot of hoops to jump through, especially as it relates to, especially when it comes to harvesters that had fishing infrastructure in we'll just say resettled communities, communities where the population residents were resettled years ago, and people just basically have their fishing infrastructure there. Sometimes there's a cabin there, there's a wharf, there's a stage, that kind of thing. So that has been very difficult because there's no town council in place that can kind of prove or provide supporting documentation for ownership of that. So that's been a struggle, as well as the other limitation that we've seen with that program is that it's for uninsurable losses. So vessels are considered insurable. And we had 3 vessel losses in that region of the province on the southwest coast. So those folks were going to have to move through a different program with that, which I believe was the intention of the ACOA funding as kind of a backstop to DFFA or DFAA. And so we're still awaiting details on that. that's a couple of challenges that we have at this point.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lynn. Thank you, Mr. Small. We'll now go to Mr. Callaway for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and it's great to see the witnesses here, and it's always good to see my fellow colleagues here. My first question is to Ms. Glynn. We've talked, I think this may be our last session of this particular study today, and we've talked to a broad cross-section of people, from government to NGOs to fish harvesters to processors, and we all agree that a lot has been invested in small craft harbors, but a lot more needs to be based on Fiona and other Fionas to come. And so when I have someone like you and our other witness here, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you, when we talk about future-proofing, the words future-proofing, and we talk about build back better, like, what does that mean to practitioners like yourself? Like, can you give us an insight of, if you had X amount of dollars tomorrow, where would you start with a particular harbor? Where would you start with a particular process operation that's close by the water? And Mr. Weiss, I'll be coming to you for a same type of question, but I wonder if I could stay with you, Ms. Glynn, in terms of where would we start? Let's unpack the words future-proofing for a second. And from your perspective and the FFAW, what does that mean to small craft harbors? What does that mean to inshore fishers? What does that mean to processing units?
So I guess I'm certainly not an expert on marine infrastructure, and I certainly wouldn't try to be or present myself as that. But I guess what I can relay from working just about on a daily basis with those 37 harvesters is, some of the questions that they're asking is like, well, how high do I need to build my wharf? Like, what do I need to expect? What do I need to prepare against? So there's those kind of practical questions. I remember I was fortunate enough to sit in last week in person in one of your hearings, and I believe it was Mr. Lease, marine engineer, I believe, or
that's correct.
Engineer. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he made a number of good points about really. New infrastructure performed better in the storm than older infrastructure. And it was more about the upkeep and keeping that infrastructure in top condition, which allowed it to weather the storm better. So, of course, upkeep of what we have. And another thing is like technology and new building material and new techniques. So to really investigate those and see what that has to offer. And sometimes that's going to be things like breakwaters. So how large, strong, high do these new breakwaters need to be to withstand the conditions that we saw 2 months ago, almost two months ago to the day almost.
I know.
To withstand that. So research into that, adopting best practices from other locations would all be very helpful in helping harvesters make those decisions and guide their investment, basically.
And thank you for the answer. And I'm not an expert on future proofing as well. So, but you are consistently talking to your stakeholders in terms of what will work, what wouldn't work, and we need to hear more from the practitioners of the trade in terms of how to future-proof and build back better. So, Mr. Wars, in terms of aquaculture, I'm wondering if I can address the same type of question, but from your point of view. You've talked a little bit about it. I'm wondering if you can, though, you highlighted there are some best practices out there in terms of other countries that have future-proofed the aquaculture industry in a more prudent and effective way. I'm wondering if we could talk a little bit about that as well in terms of future-proofing from your perspective.
I think not that other jurisdictions necessarily have future-proofed more effectively, just that they are already operating in conditions which potentially we're going to have to operate in given the potential impacts of climate change. Certainly as we're looking at warmer waters, we're going to have to look at farming in deeper waters. They already farm mussels in deeper waters in New Zealand, in Newfoundland, and other areas of the world. So, we need to go and look at those jurisdictions to see how they're operating. And I think, there are a lot of lessons to be learned already potentially for that. As Ms. Glynn said, I'm, no expert when it comes to marine engineering, but I think the expertise is out there, and we need to get those people in to talk to our members, our stakeholders, so that they can access that expertise.
If we can just take Fiona, for example, and I think you alluded to it in your opening statement, in terms of best practices or just practices in general that we learned this time around from Fiona, what can you ascertain from your own experience? No, you're not a structural engineer, nor am I, but from just observing the catastrophic impact of this storm that it had on aquaculture and small craft harbors and even processing plants in Cape Breton. One was essentially just wiped out because of the waves and whatnot. From what you've seen, what are some items of learning outcomes that we can achieve here?
I think the industry is going to need to be supported in redeveloping their infrastructure. As I mentioned in my opening statement, there are thousands and thousands of dollars invested by owner-operators, small businesses in, their sites, their leases already. So, what was done during Dorian, which was the last storm that had a big impact on us before this, lessons were learned. Gear was sunk well ahead of the storm, but in this particular case, that in some areas it didn't matter. Cages were still destroyed, product was lost. Certainly, in case of seed collectors, a lot of that product has been lost completely. So it's not just a matter of changing the best practices. It's a matter of supporting the industry to be able to, undertake those changes in a
consistent way,
in a reasonably timely manner, because we don't know how long it's going to be until the next one of these once-in-a-century storms comes along.
So true. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. We'll now go to Madame Debienne for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll continue with Mr. Weris. Is that the right pronunciation, Weris? Am I Warris? Thank you. I'll continue with you because you mentioned a program that could be similar to the programs used for farmers. I'm quite enthusiastic about that because I sat on the emergency committee set up during the pandemic. I assisted my colleague on the Agriculture Committee, and we realized that the program had provided a great deal of support for farmers for reasons other than the pandemic. Climate change, that is a different issue. But these programs did provide good support for farmers. Given the unpredictability of their environment, they were able to at least get by. As for aquaculture, which uses equipment, could a program like the farming program be useful? There's a participative management approach where all stakeholders are involved, governments, fishers. Everybody takes part in the exercise of putting in place the funding that's needed. Is this something that could be useful to fishers, to have a program that could be used if there was a storm of this kind? Or is there already some kind of financial assistance provided for, to which both fishers and the government contributes, so that there would be available funding and provide some kind of predictability? I think this is what I understood from what you said.
The existing programs that I referred to, the Canadian Agricultural Partnership Program, which has been established for quite some time, we feel that as it's a program for farming operations, that many of those programs would translate very well to the aquaculture industry, which, as I mentioned, is really a farming industry. Income stabilization, disaster relief, business risk management, all those programs are established already for the Canadian farmers, Canadian terrestrial farmers. Certainly our national organization, CAIA, Canadian Aquaculture Industry Association, have been talking about piloting business risk management programs similar to those under CAP for the shellfish aquaculture industry for some time. And we really feel that those programs, there's no point in reinventing the wheel. The programs are there already. Aquaculture just needs to be able to access those programs, either accessing the existing programs or setting up a subsidiary program just for the aquaculture sector, but basically based on the same model. They're already there and working. They may not be perfect. I'm sure there's some farmers that you could speak to would probably say they're not, but it would certainly be something that we would like to see.
Do you believe? How can I put it? Do you feel anxiety among fishers that might take them so far as to leave the fishing industry? If there's no financial assistance after storms like these, it does make owners, fishers, who will no longer have the money to reinvest, rethink. So, in fact, we're compromising, or we would in this way compromise a significant portion of the fishery. Do you think some fishers are reviewing what they do for a living, rethinking what they do for a living?
I would say that there definitely is some anxiety, and the need for immediate financial assistance is there, especially for some of our members whose lease infrastructure was completely destroyed. In some areas we have not just partial damage, but leases which have basically just been torn away completely. So for those people to reinvest the time and effort to go out and basically completely rebuild what has been constructed over many, many years, to rebuild from new, with the potential for another storm to come in and there still not be any financial backing for an industry that supports rural economies across the province, I think that would cause them a lot of anxiety. Certainly we have members that were impacted by Dorian who had just finished getting everything back together after that storm, who have now been impacted by Fiona. So very heartbreaking for them.
Thank you, Madame Debienne. Your time is up. Before I allow Ms. Barron to start, I will let her know that she was well represented in her absence by Mr. Backrack and Ms. Sorello. They did a fantastic job. And now you have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. And I have heard that was the case. I'm happy to hear. Thank you to the witnesses who are here today, and I'm happy to be back. Ms. Glynn, I wanted to ask a few questions based on some of the things that you were discussing in your opening statement, and also you provided some clarification to my colleague, of course, MP Kellaway as well. But just wanted to build off, when you were talking about storm-resilient infrastructure, I want to make sure we're really clear when we're going to write the recommendations on how to best move forward to the government. What do you foresee as sort of the key qualities and characteristics of what we should be investing in, or what the government should be investing in for storm-resilient infrastructure?
Thank you for that question, Ms. Barron. I guess a couple of things that we've been hearing from members, like I mentioned, is, wharves and just, and stages. How high do we need to build those now? What is high enough? And some people relayed the numbers to me along the way. At one point, and a wharf or a stage 8 feet above the high water mark was fine. They carried on like that for years and years without an issue. Apparently, that's no longer fine. In one of our communities, we had a 140-year-old heritage structure. It withstood 140 years of storms on the southwest coast of Newfoundland, which is not a very hospitable place in the best of times. And Fiona destroyed it. In a matter of a couple hours, it was destroyed. So we know that what we had is not good enough anymore. Because it's all gone, basically. That shoreline is wiped clean. So we need a different approach. We need to engage experts in the area of marine infrastructure, marine engineering, to get that technology, those techniques in place. So wharf height, stage height is one thing. Another thing that harvesters in the area have constantly mentioned has been breakwaters. And I think we've seen from some of the presentations last week from Cape Breton, and we see it on PEI, dredging is super important in some areas. Just the bottom type, the substrate type that we have in that area in Newfoundland, it's not so much dredging that's important. Breakwaters are incredibly important in that area. So to look at the newest technology and techniques in breakwater construction, so that these shorelines and the infrastructure itself, those wharves, those stages, are adequately protected.
Thank you. That's valuable information for us to be able to move forward with, both around ensuring that the infrastructure is being rebuilt as an investment that's going to last into the future, and also that's region specific based on all of the qualities that you're talking about. So that's very helpful. You also spoke about the lost gear and ensuring that there's processes in place to remain responsive and ready when a disaster like that we saw from Hurricane Fiona takes place. And I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to the prevention side of that, what you would foresee that might prevent the quantity of lost gear, and perhaps expand a little bit on what you saw and what you're hearing from fishers on the water around what they're seeing around lost gear.
Yeah, sure. So on the prevention part, a lot of that comes back to the more resilient infrastructure, like we've been talking about, and I mean, really, in the days since Fiona and some of the visits out there, I've already had some harvesters relocate gear. They've bought land in some of these small communities, and they will shift whatever they can further away from the water's edge. So that's something that harvesters have taken on themselves to try and do and make their own enterprise more resilient in the decisions that they can make themselves. And and I think the second part of your question, Ms. Barron, was about improving kind of the process, I believe, of applying for compensation.
Any information around it's helpful. So yes, go ahead with that. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Like the biggest change I think that would be helpful would be just to streamline the process. Like, I don't think any of us should have been or should be in the future terribly surprised about these dramatic and devastating climate related events. In September it was Eastern Canada. Next month, 6 months down the road, it could be Central Canada, Western Canada, the North. These are all realities that we're facing. And it just kind of felt that when Fiona hit, in some ways, it kind of felt like we were starting from scratch and trying to, I know these programs existed, but try to find ways around it and how we could make this work for the fishing industry. We know these events are going to happen, unfortunately. But I think to be better prepared, have the processes in place. I mean, we're over 2 months down the road now, I guess nine weeks or so since the hurricane struck. me personally and a coworker have spent several weeks in the area and done a lot of work on this, and we're still just now looking at hopefully getting some applications submitted to the DFFA program. And that was with assistance from the province to answer questions, and they're quick and everything. So it's just, if that process could be streamlined and provide people with some predictability, because I think that's what everybody finds difficult in this, is they're not sure what's going to be covered. They're not sure what that compensation might look like. They're not sure the next steps. So, we're not that we want to water things down or, we all realize we're spending other people's money and we must be incredibly accountable to Canadian taxpayers. But if there was a bit more predictability and streamlining of that application process, it'll be very helpful.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Barron. I will let the committee know that our third witness has joined us, Mr. Arsenault from the Ile de la Madeleine. But I'd need consent from the committee to allow him to start an opening statement. I notice he hasn't got a house set of earphones, so if that's the case, if we do, I would ask the interpreters to let us know if there's a problem with it, and we'll cut it off or not. Could we?
I'm just concerned about the interpreters.
Yeah, I realise that. Perhaps what we will do in the case of people not being comfortable with not the right equipment, if we could ask Mr. Arsenault to send in his written statement to the committee so as the committee could have that and use that as a statement. But I will remind members, if they want Mr. Arsenault to ask a question in the next two questioners, to identify that you're asking a question to Mr. Arsenault, and we'll see what happens. Okay, so we'll go on now to Mr. Bragdon for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for appearing today and for sharing some very important information with us, the committee, and important considerations have been contained in the testimony we've heard from all the witnesses so far. I want to address my questions primarily to you, Mr. Warris, today. Thank you for joining us here and from the beautiful island of Prince Edward Island. And I had the privilege of visiting there shortly after Hurricane Fiona went through and visited some of the wharfs that were directly impacted, and of course Stanley Bridge and North Rustico, and witnessed some of the direct effects and huge impacts that were held there. A lot of the concerns that we're hearing directly from those who rely on the fishing industry for their livelihoods is in the immediate aftermath of the storm. Lots of politicians come running in and promises of help and aid and all kinds of resources, and all of us want to do what we can to make sure that help gets there. But oftentimes, after the immediate aftermath of a storm, and it blows out to seas, the politicians go back and the people are still left and trying to clean up the mess and deal with the situation. The key is to make sure that there's expediency and that there's urgency and that there's continuity in the help that is coming from here to the provinces and to the wharves in particular that have been so impacted by Hurricane Fiona, so that those harvesters, those in the aquaculture business that have been so devastatingly impacted, are getting the help they need in an expeditious way. Can you speak to that just for a moment? In your estimation, has the assistance come readily, and are the wharves being repaired expeditiously? And do you feel that these harvesters are going to be able to get back on the water doing what they do in a timely fashion?
In terms of the wharves, I can't really speak to them directly. I mean, our members do use small craft harbour wharves and other launch points that are administered by the provincial government. It's great that there is some funding has been assigned towards the development and future-proofing of those harbours and other infrastructure. In terms of the program that's out there now to help our smaller employer members with the impact that they've suffered directly from the damage from the storm, there is a lot of uncertainty around what was going to be covered. There still is some uncertainty around what is going to be covered, and how that's going to happen. Certainly the Red Cross, who administer that program, have said that they're going to support our members through that. We've been supporting our members through that application process. It's not necessarily going to be an immediate thing, and it shouldn't necessarily be an immediate thing for some of our members because, as I mentioned, they potentially won't see damages until further through the winter. So we don't necessarily want them to rush into something and then realize that they have significantly more expenses than had been initially estimated. But I would say, looking to the future, that if the aquaculture industry could access the CAP program or something similar, then that would provide a level, provide a level of certainty to the industry as to that they are going to have a program there from the get-go specifically for aquaculture. Because at the moment that program, the provincial program, really is kind of general to everybody.
One of the things we've heard, Mr. Wars, quite a bit from those in the aquaculture sector and, of course, those in the harvesting sector on the island is the absolute need for sound, solid investment in the infrastructure to get it up to speed in our wharfs, and in particular small craft harbors. And this has been identified in the report that came out 3 years ago, that there needed to be strategic investment not only in the wharves and the infrastructure for small craft harbors, but also in the area of dredging. I know in Malpeque there's been some real challenges in the harbor there with a major dredging need that's there. And it seems like there's been promises made, there's been a lot of commitments, and it always gets talked about in the blue economy. But if we do not invest and adapt our infrastructure for the future, because we know the storms are inevitable and we know what's going to be coming, what we have to do is strategically invest in adequate infrastructure to support the incredible potential of our blue economy, and that being of aquaculture and fisheries going into the future. So along that line, and we know there's going to be harvesters that want to get back on the water. Do you feel they're going to have adequate resources in place and the small craft harbors and wharfs will be up to speed in time for the oncoming seasons?
Mr. Bragdon, we're going way over time.
Oh, okay.
And
Thank you, Mr.
I'd ask Mr. Wars to submit an answer in writing, if he could, please, to the committee. Thank you.
Certainly.
We'll now go to Mr. Morrissey for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just for the record, because we have a number of people appearing on before this committee on small craft harbors and the need to urgently put money in, and there was a statement about politicians coming in and out. The recent fall economic statement from the government provided $1 billion for emergency, $1 billion, and $300 million for small craft harbors, and the official opposition voted against both. So there goes the concern for the importance of rebuilding after Fiona. Now I will go to Mr. Warris. You made a statement that, and I would like for you to expand to the committee, because PI is unique in the mussel side, and we can see the immediate damage of infrastructure from small craft harbors and around there. So, and we've had ample witness testimony on that. But the mussel industry, it's underwater, so we don't see it. So I want the committee to get a full appreciation for the damage, and the damage that will carry forward for a couple of years. So could you explain to the committee why it'll take a number of years for this industry to recover, and what steps we have to do to assist it over those several years?
Thank you for the question. In the immediate sense, with lost product, market-ready product, obviously that's gone, and that's therefore going to impact, the markets. The majority of the shellfish produced on PEI is exported, certainly from the province and in a lot of cases from the country. So it's a good economic driver for the province. So that has an immediate impact. The infrastructure that's been damaged to the point of no longer being usable or being basically completely destroyed, that's going to limit the ability for product to be grown. Those areas can no longer be farmed as they stand right now, so need to be rebuilt and in many cases, the growers are going to need the financial support to do that, and that's going to have to happen over the winter.
Lobster, which, well, we still don't know the full impact on until fisheries reopen, and we'll see in Nova Scotia in the coming days where that fishery opens. We don't know the full impact of Hurricane Fiona on lobster and crab and some of the pelagic species, but on mussel, it's not something that will be there in a month or so. Am I correct? It's for that biomass that was lost. It'll take some period of time to recover to that stage.
Yes, in terms of the seed or spat for the mussel and oyster industry. So for those who are unfamiliar, seed juveniles are collected from the open water for shellfish aquaculture. There are hatcheries, but they're certainly a very small proportion of the seed that is collected. And those collectors are out in the open water. It happens on an annual basis. There is a season where the seed is running and then is collected and grown on the collectors, is harvested, and then is put into either socks or cages for the following years. And the seed that was lost because of the storm is gone. So therefore, the seed that would have been growing in socks and bags through next year and in the following year is not there. So therefore, it's not going to be grown. And in the case of the oyster side of things, it's going to be 2 to 3 years further down the line.
You referenced earlier about the market share. And could you give some testimony to the committee on the negative impact it would have on PI's mussel industry's market share and how that could be impacted?
The potential exists for there to be product shortages, as I said. PEI is the largest producer of mussels in North America. We farm approximately 80% of the mussels produced in North America. They're a very popular product, very widely known as a quality product, both mussels and oysters. And they're very, very strong markets for those products. And restaurants across the country and across North America and in other parts of the world are still going to want to have those products on their menus. So if we're not providing them or are unable to provide them for a few years, or at least fully provide to the level that we have it before, the potential exists for them to go elsewhere for that product. And there are other producers in the world. So the concern is that, we could lose that share of the market, which is why supports need to continue into the future, not just in the immediate sense. The industry is going to need to be supported so that if that does happen, we can regain that preeminence.
Thank you, Mr. Morrissey. That closes up our first hour of committee testimony and questions. I want to say a big thank you to Mr. Warse, Ms. Glenn and Mr. Arsenault for joining us, albeit was late, but he did join, and sharing their knowledge with the committee today on this very important study. We'll suspend for a couple of minutes now while we switch out panels. Suspended. Please wait until I recognise you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom, you have choice at the bottom of your screen of either Floor, English or French. For those in the room, of course, they'll be well used to it. You can use the earpiece and select the right channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. I would now like to welcome our witnesses. From the department, of course, we have Mr. Adam Burns, Acting Assistant Deputy Minister, Fisheries and Harbour Management, Chris Henderson, Deputy Commissioner Operations, Stephanie Hopper, Director General, Small Craft Harbours Programme, Gary Ivney, Assistant Commissioner, Atlantic Region, Canadian Coast Guard, Ms. Laurie Cuddy, Area Director, Prince Edward Island by video conference, and Mr. Doug Wenzel, Regional Director General, Maritimes Region by video conference. Thank you all for taking the time to appear before committee today. You now have 5 minutes or less for an opening statement. I believe, Mr. Burns, you're at least starting it off. I don't know if you're given the full 5 minutes or not, but you're up.
I'll see what I can do. Thanks, Chair, and hi, members. Fisheries and Oceans Canada is responsible for sustainably managing Canada's fisheries and oceans resources and safeguarding our waters while supporting economic growth in the marine and fisheries sectors. With the longest coastline in the world, Canada's marine and coastal areas are an essential part to our country, our economy, and our livelihoods. However, as our climate continues to change, so do our waters. Rising sea levels, reduced sea ice, and increased frequency and severity of storms and storm surges are damaging our shorelines and coastal infrastructure, in particular, Canada's small craft harbours. Le Programme des Ports pour Petits Bateaux.
The Small Craft Harbour Programme is responsible for approximately 1,000 harbours, which collectively represent some 10,000 structures assessed at over $7 billion. Over 5,000 volunteers each year take part in the program through port administrations locally and contribute to keeping the harbours open. These harbours are essential to the fisheries industry and provide commercial fishers as well as other users with safe and accessible facilities.
In Fiona, the impacts were immense, including significant fishing gear loss from various active fisheries and aquaculture operations, and damaged over 140 small craft harbours across Atlantic Canada and eastern Quebec. To help address some of the devastation caused by this storm, a $300 million Hurricane Fiona Recovery Fund was announced in early October. From that fund, $100 million has been allocated to support the immediate and urgent work to recover lost fishing gear and address repairs to many of our small craft harbours. Since this record-breaking storm, our small craft harbour program staff have been diligently working with local harbour authorities to ensure harbours are cleaned up and that urgent repairs are addressed. Hurricane Fiona also created the need for increased dredging at a number of harbours because of the significant coastal erosion, and dredging operations continue at impacted harbours as we speak. Our small craft harbour program have been and will continue to work and carry out in-depth assessments of damage in order to address longer-term repairs. In the coming months, we are confident that the vast majority of impacted harbours will be operational come this spring. Further to the damage caused to our small craft harbours, Hurricane Fiona significantly impacted a large amount of fishing gear. To date, harvesters estimate there are tens of thousands of units of various fishing gear that have been lost due to gear drift and infrastructure damage. Funding was provided to boost Fisheries and Oceans Canada's Ghost Gear Fund, which supports concrete actions to prevent, retrieve, and responsibly dispose of lost fishing gear. At present, $1.5 million in additional funds have been made available to the Ghost Gear Fund to undertake immediate critical gear cleanup activities, with $28.4 million allocated for proposals going forward. The call-out for proposals is now open and is accepting applications until December 28th of this year. Thank you for the opportunity to join you today, and we're happy to take your questions.
Thank you for that. A little bit under time. We always like to save a bit of time for the questions. We'll now go to Mr. Small for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is to Mr. Burns. You just said that you have $100 million to support fishing gear recovery and repair of small craft harbors. Now, earlier in this same meeting, Mr. Morrissey said that $300 million would be provided for this initiative. What's the right figure?
So $300 million is the total amount announced by the Government of Canada for the Fiona recovery measures. Some of that is with ACOA, and so they could speak to the specific investments that they are making. But I was referring specifically to the $100 million that's been particularly earmarked to address small craft harbors and Ghost
So
Gear.
1/3 of that $300 million is, okay.
Correct.
Is for fishing industry purposes.
Specifically small craft harbors and Ghost Gear, yeah.
Okay. Well, what's the dollar value that your department has assessed to the damages, to the damaged and destroyed small craft harbor infrastructure? Do you have a dollar value on that yet?
So, yeah, thanks. I was waiting for my. Anyways, one of the tasks that we'll be doing, supported through the initial funding that we've received, is the necessary engineering work to complete a full assessment to know the exact answer to that question. We don't have a precise number to give you today.
So we had some disputed testimony earlier in the week. Stakeholders said that there's not a chance that small craft harbor infrastructure would be ready for this upcoming season. What you just said that we'd be ready. What's the plan to expedite that?
So we've been working very diligently to undertake the immediate dredging needs and the primary repair activities, and as a result of that, the vast majority of the impacted harbors will be operational come spring. There's a very small number of harbors, somewhere between 2 and 10, that may not be operational, and we are already working on plans to accommodate the impacted harvesters so that their operations will be able to continue.
Thank you. Mr. Perkins can take over from here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, witnesses. If I could follow up, Mr. Burns, on that. So my understanding from testimony we've heard is that no engineering contracts have been let for some of the design of some of these wharfs that need repair, especially the ones that have been demolished. I think 20 or so have been demolished in an earlier DFO estimate. And obviously there's a question of whether or not there is labor and materials out there to perform the work within that time. So can you maybe shed a little more light on how that'll happen by the spring?
If I may. Most of the cleanup and early assessment and repairs have already been done at most of the harbors, and we're currently underway for planning in terms of the longer-term repairs that will need to be occurring over the coming months, and be mindful as well of the weather, the season that we're entering into as well, that planning is happening. However, repairs and planning is underway.
And the $100 million, you know, I've got wharfs in my riding, a recent one in Lunenburg, the estimate is $25 million to replace it. When you have a number of demolished wharfs, which you have, how is it possible that $100 million is adequate to deal with the wharfs? And in the case of what we just heard from testimony just before you, the $70 million plus damage just to the aquaculture industry in PEI?
So in terms of funding to support disaster recovery for other aspects like what you're referring to there with aquaculture, that would be separate from the $100 million that's been announced to date related to small craft harbors. The money is meant to do the short-term repairs, to support the engineering assessments of the wharves that are severely damaged, and to get us to a point where we understand more completely what the overall impacts have been. And then we can start to make a plan for the full repair and obviously assess what the full cost of that repair would be.
Okay, so the full repair won't be done by the spring?
No, as I mentioned, there's somewhere between 2 and 10 harbors that we believe will not be operational in the spring.
Okay. And 3 years ago, this committee produced a report on the state of small craft harbors, and I think your predecessor, I don't know how many predecessors, but Ms. Lapointe said that at the time she suggested and the committee recommended as a result that the A-base funding needed to double for small craft harbors. Do you believe that A-base funding for small craft harbors needs to be doubled?
So right now we're focused on the repairs to the harbors related to Fiona. I haven't come here with a full assessment of what any sort of future budget would need to look like. We're focused on the engineering assessment of the damage so that we can identify what the full cost will be.
Thank you, Mr. Perkins. We'll now go to Mr. Morrissey for 6 minutes or less.
My question, general, and again, I'll make one comment, whether it's 100, 300, or $1 billion, we're in a discussion on what's needed to improve the infrastructure of small craft harbors, and regardless of the amount, the official opposition voted against providing any additional money to the East Coast to assist in Hurricane Fiona. But my concern, and this is a point that I do agree with the opposition members on, is my concern is the timeline in getting projects designed, tendered, and work going on. So what I would like to hear from the members of the department is there ways that we can simplify the process, speed up the process for getting some work done. I'll start with Mr. Burns, and then I'm going to ask Ms. Cuddy to comment on how we can improve the timelines in getting projects approved and delivered as it relates to small craft harbors. Mr. Burns?
Thanks. And absolutely, we are working very closely with the various service providers in the regions in order to get as much work done this fall as we can, so that we have the benefit of as much of the engineering assessments and overall assessments, so that we can have a plan ready to go for the spring when construction season restarts. And so we are absolutely working with Public Services and Procurement Canada. Did I get that right? The name of the department, and ensuring that to the maximum extent possible, we're streamlining the processes and we'll get as much work done as is reasonable this fall before the snow flies.
My question, Ms. Cuddy, will small craft harbors be operational this spring for those fishing areas that depend on those harbors?
I can only answer for the PEI area, and for your question in general, I will defer
I'm just
to,
asking about PEI.
PEI, yeah, we will be, all wharfs should be operational this spring.
The fishing season will start on time. There will be no delay because of infrastructure of small craft harbors.
Exactly.
Okay, thanks. My other question would be: do you see a role for the local port authorities? There's been a lot invested in the operation of port authorities. They have acquired an expertise over the years. On some projects, could government roll out some minor maintenance projects through port authorities that would speed up the process? And I'll go back to Mr. Burns to answer that as well. Or I'll start with Mr. Burns, then I'll go to Ms. Cuddy in fairness.
Yeah, we already have the authority to engage with the harbour authorities for smaller projects.
Yeah, if you have the authority, are you going to do that over the next number of months?
I believe we already are. I might turn to my colleague.
Yeah, certainly, it depends on the scale of the work that needs to be done, and if
what's the scale that you can deal with?
if it's
don't be evasive.
If
I want
it's
to
a
get
minor
to the
repair, or if it's a
What's
longer
minor?
term major capital project that will require sort of more over a year and a half or years, then obviously we'd be looking at sort of
what's a minor?
Minor repairs is something that could be done within a couple of weeks.
But put a dollar value on the minors.
We have procurement options within the department to go directly to harbour authorities up to 80,000, after which then we have to go through our own DFO procurement hub, and following that, as Mr. Burns mentioned, the public service.
How long has the
Canada.
80,000 limit been there?
I can't answer that, actually.
Could you back to the committee? Maybe it's time we reevaluate if the ceiling should be risen for this emergency situation we're in, to allow port authorities to play a more substantive role in procuring the contracts they need to do repairs at their facilities.
Yes, we'll endeavour to get that information to you.
Okay. No, Ms. Cuddy, do you want to comment? Or I know it's local, but you deal extensively with the port authorities in Prince Edward Island, and some deal with some small projects quite effectively. Is that a way of getting some of the money? Because sometimes we may argue, is 100 million or several hundred million or $1 billion enough? What I'm hearing from a lot of the industry is we do have a capacity issue, and one of it is contractors, and we cannot deal with that. Is there adequate contractors around to provide this work in a timely manner? The other is the ability to get approvals to the local ports in a timely manner so they can engage in some of this work themselves. Ms. Cuddy?
Okay, we have, for PEI, we've already engaged with the harbour authorities and have contracts with them for Fiona-related cleanup and those minor repairs that my colleague just mentioned.
Thank you, Mr. Morrissey. We'll now go to Madame Debienne for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you to our witnesses. We really appreciate your presence. We know that you have a great deal to manage, and everybody's trying to act at the same time, so you have my sympathy I am primarily concerned about Quebec. Fiona really shed light. I have a study on small craft harbors, and I believe that Fiona really showed clearly how important it is to proceed with that study. For Quebec, do you have an idea of the number of harbors that are in a that will need to be upgraded and restored? And do you have an estimate of how much it would cost? Are you doing a breakdown by province, or is it different? Thank you for the question. We conduct an assessment for all harbour needs across the country. We do rely on regional offices to help with priorization. There is an assessment that is being done regularly to evaluate port and harbour conditions and to see how and when work will have to be done. Is this something the committee could be provided with so that we know where we're at and have an idea? Yes, we can share that with you because there are specific criteria that are assessed. I went to the Magdalen Islands before Fiona, and there was already a part of the Cap-aux-Meules wharf that was quite complex because Fisheries and Oceans was responsible for part of it. There was an extra dock to increase the area where ships could dock, but it's difficult when they're fully loaded. I've seen ships I've seen ships obliged to maneuver to allow colleagues and others to transship, to offload. And the lobster fishery is the Magdalen Islands' most important industry. It was complex already, and what Fiona did was make it clear how urgent issues are in the Magdalen Islands and on Quebec's two shores. There was a plan in place before Fiona. Has that plan been amended as a result of the storm? There was a plan. You did a lot, but it was urgent to look at the small craft harbors because there was already a great deal to do even before Fiona. So now, after Fiona, can you give us an indication of the magnitude of the additional burden that Fiona has created? Yes, I do understand the question, but unfortunately we don't have a figure for that. Well, you already, no doubt, had amounts that you're intending to invest to upgrade the most decrepit ports. Fiona made those ports and harbors worse. So there is no doubt an increase in the investment that you are expecting to need. Is there a budget for that? I think we are continuing, as we generally do, to conduct our assessments. We're engaged in the planning stage. We are in the second year of the 300 million provided for in the 2020-21 budget. And there is 100 million to be invested in small craft harbors over the 2 coming years. That is all going to be included in the planning. Do you believe that a fund, a plan, a support program for infrastructure for needs brought about by climate change, well, is that something the government might be interested in? Planning for a certain amount of money that might be needed in extreme cases where the lack of infrastructure would compromise the fishery, its very existence, it's the exercise of fishing. Could there be a fund for that? I can't speak to that, but I do know that the 300, we were mentioning the 300 million did have 100 million earmarked for that specifically. Well, would that be enough? Unfortunately, I cannot say. That's outside my ambit. What I can say is that we'll have to wait until engineers have completed their work and identified costs and established plans for repairing damaged harbours. You don't have a series of priorities. You're going by the most urgent cases rather than economic criteria. Well, it's both. The idea is to put in place a plan enabling fishers to continue fishing. These are all considerations that are taken into account, both the state of the harbour and the economic angle.
And for 6 minutes or less.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to our witnesses for being here again. Building off many of the questions that have been asked, we're hearing from witnesses over and over about absolutely the need for action to be taken immediately so that we can ensure that fishers are out on the water as planned, but also around the importance of weather resilient infrastructure or natural infrastructure. And I'm wondering, through this process of rebuilding, what considerations are taken to ensure that we're not just continuing to put a Band-Aid solution, that we're actually rebuilding appropriately to take into consideration future extreme weather events that will inevitably occur.
I can start, and then if you want to add. Certainly climate resilience in the infrastructure that we'll be rebuilding and repairing is one of the key things that we'll be asking the engineers who are doing the evaluations and who will be ultimately doing the plans for those repairs. That's one of the ultimate things we're asking them to keep in mind is the plans should reflect climate resilient infrastructure. So it's absolutely part of the plan.
And so through that planning process, are local communities, harvesters, and so on, is there any consultation happening? Because we know that much knowledge is gained from talking to those who are in those specific regions.
Certainly. From the outset, the nature of the Small Craft Harbors program, we have a very, very close relationship with the harbour authorities and those working in the communities, so there's a very tight relationship there. And also when we're doing our planning and considering any repairs or building, we do consider different climate adaptation tools that are in use and that we continue and will continue to adapt based on recent climate events as well to make sure that those considerations are taken into account when we're doing future planning as well.
Thank you. And so was the considerations around rebuilding more resilient infrastructure considered in the decision to implement 100,000 to the rebuilding process? Like, how does this play into the budgeting implications?
So the 100 million is really, well, first a portion of it is for ghost gear retrieval, but the portion that is specifically for small craft harbors, that's for the immediate dredging and minor repair needs, as well as for the engineering assessments and the development of the longer term rebuilding plans. So, most of that work is sort of separate from long-term climate resilient infrastructure, but will be built into the engineering engineering assessments and rebuilding plans that come as a result of that investment.
And perhaps if I still have a little bit of time, can you speak a little bit to what you're hearing then from, through this process on what would be sort of the key features of climate resilient infrastructure? And I would like to hear also the perspective of our Mr. Ivany and Mr. Henderson around their perspective out on the water of what you foresee as increasingly more resilient infrastructure so that we're not having to continue to react to incidences like this as they occur.
I said, we are continuing to work with the harbour authorities, and in terms of what sort of climate adaptation tools that can continue to be refined, if you will, as we go forward. There's no sort of a magic solution to anything, obviously, but as we do invest and rebuild, that is certainly taken into consideration. And we do, again, I can't repeat enough the nature of the relationship, the close relationship with the harbour authorities, to take their concerns under consideration when doing the planning.
Thank you for the question. First, I'll start by just pointing out that for us in the Coast Guard, responding is what we do. And so we will always continue to do that. And sadly, I think it's the case that we'll always have to be responding to extreme weather events. So we're going to continue to try to get it right. We're putting a lot of effort into making sure that our new infrastructure is climate resilient. So we've been building new search and rescue lifeboat stations, as an example, some in Atlantic Canada, some in British Columbia. And those are made to standards that are the best standards we can get and that we know of at the moment. With respect to consultation, we in the past haven't always done it right, that's for sure. But we are consulting now, and can share an example from British Columbia at Vancouver Island with Port Hardy. We built a search and rescue lifeboat station there without consultation, and we heard about it. And then we built a new environmental response depot in close consultation with the Quagilth, and it was, a very successful experience. And that is a robust facility. It's built high out of the water with lots of space. It's accommodates rising tide, and there's lots of excess capacity for the wharf to move up. So I think we're taking these steps as we go. We're retroactively looking at facilities that need additional work. And then we're also building climate resilience into our new ships through the fleet renewal plan, so that they're better seakeeping, better designed, with reduced emissions. Plus, we know we're building ships that have longer legs and better capabilities to do search and rescue. So our Bay class lifeboats, for example, they can go further. They can do more than the ships they're replacing. And so we feel that we're going to be better postured to deal with the unfortunate results of extreme weather when they inevitably hit us.
Thank you, Ms. Barron. A little bit over, but that's okay. You're just back fresh. We'll now go to Mr. Arnold for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And unfortunately, I'm working remotely today, but I've got some questions for, I believe Mr. Avani will be the best to answer these, and then I have to pass the other half of my time to Mr. Perkins. Mr. Avani, what were the significant effects of Hurricane Fiona on Canadian Coast Guard operations in the Atlantic region?
Okay, thank you very much for the question. So the Canadian Coast Guard in Atlantic region has unfortunately been dealing with severe weather events quite a bit in the last few years. So we had a very good plan going in. We spent a lot of time in the days ahead of Hurricane Fiona on preparedness. So through all that good planning and resources that we put in at a time, there were very few impacts at all on Coast Guard floating infrastructure. All of our ships were well positioned away from the storm, ready to respond. And mariners around Atlantic Canada really heeded warnings for this storm and stayed out of the way. We had cruise ships moving to different ports. We had tankers and ferries all doing the right thing and being in the right place away from the direct impacts of the storm. So direct impacts on Coast Guard in Atlantic Canada from a floating asset were very, very minor. Certainly our college in Cape Breton did receive some damage there, but our staff and our officers and our officer cadets that were there turned to pretty quick and turned that negative situation to a very positive situation by opening up the facility on emergency power, making food, and supporting Canadians that were close by that needed assistance.
What about other land-based assets? Were there other impacts?
Very minor. All of our fixed aids of navigation, pretty well all of our towers, all sustained the winds in that area very, very well. Certainly, we saw damage around Port aux Basques, but our infrastructure in those areas all stood the challenges that Mother Nature provided on that day. Recent investments in the Ocean Protection Plan allowed us to put redundant systems in for our peripheral marine communication traffic services sites, as well as hardening some of our radar sites as well. So all of those assets functioned very well, and those backup systems all worked when power went down and communications was needed from a vessel traffic services perspective and a safety perspective.
Okay, thank you. Will any Coast Guard resources previously allocated to other purposes need to be reallocated to deal with the restoring capacities after Fiona?
In this case, it was we spent a lot of time in preparedness and readiness in Coast Guard, and whenever there is a response, we turn all resources to responding. So in certain parts of the plans, whether we were planning to do maintenance or planning to do preparedness type of work on assets, whether it be floating or fixed aids, we did need to turn attention and put additional resources to replace aids and other minor repairs that had to be carried out to buildings and some infrastructure.
Okay, I think I have to turn the rest of my time over to Mr. Perkins.
A minute and a half.
Thank you. Well, I'll try and make it quick. In this excellent report, of which I think, Mr. Chair, you chaired from 2019 from the committee, DFO noted that climate change is leading both to greater demands for dredging, but also the extent of repairs required, and it identified a wharf in New Brunswick that was being undermined, which obviously no work was done because that's the one that was impacted by Fiona. Do you have an assessment of the state of all the small craft harbor wharfs and whether or not they are in Atlantic Canada, whether or not they're able to withstand these kinds of storms?
I believe, like I was speaking, responded earlier to Madame Desbiens, that we conduct regular assessments of our harbours and determine on a priority basis the need and the scope and plan towards, like I said, based on a number of criteria, socioeconomic being one of them. So we don't have an overall number, like we said earlier, to be able to give in terms of what that number could be for all of our harbours. However, we do regular assessments and reassess as well after certain weather events such as Fiona.
Did the wharfs that you had recently done projects on in these areas in Nova Scotia and PEI in particular, did they fare better in the storm, or was it the weaker wharfs that hadn't had any work done that where most of the damage was done?
What we've been seeing that as we have been incorporating the different climate adaptation tools as work progresses, so as we've been doing, as I mentioned before, with the different funding envelopes, whether it be Budget 2018 or Budget 2001 when reinvesting, that those structures are standing up fairly well to significant weather events. Of course, that depends on where they're located and a number of other circumstances, but in general, where we are being able to invest and doing that planning, it is seemingly beneficial.
Thank you, Mr. Perkins. We'll go now to Mr. Cormier for 5 minutes or less, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My first question, and I do know that Hurricane Fiona was devastating also in provinces other than New Brunswick, but I do know that in New Brunswick some harbours and wharves were seriously damaged. In the northeast, especially in Acadie Bathurst, my riding, even if the hurricane didn't strike as hard as in other regions, there was damage to wharves, damage to breakwaters. It will be difficult to go out to sea next season. So here's my question. Have you conducted assessments in northeastern New Brunswick harbours to assess damage? And are you assessing harbours which have had large amounts of sand building up at the entrance? Were you saying in northern New Brunswick? In the northeast, yes. We conduct assessments of all harbours regularly to establish needs, and dredging is a challenge for a number of harbours. This is why we're working closely with our teams and with contractors to put in place potential solutions to prevent any issues when the fishery reopens. Since I was elected in 2015, I can name all the harbours in the region for which every year I have to call your department to make sure that at the last minute they get dredged because there's a problem. We all know which those harbours are, and I'm sure you do too. I'm sure you do know exactly which harbours need dredging. So why do you wait for the last minute to make decisions? The amount you mentioned was $90,000, but for $90,000, you believe that harbour authorities can do the work. Why not let the harbour authorities do the work if you have too much to do? We do work closely with harbours and port administrations to deliver a program that ensures the security and safety of users, of harbour users. Dredging represents a great deal of work and coordination to ensure that all our harbours are suitable and ready for the fishery to open safely. I understand, Ms. Hopper, but here's my question. We know which harbours are going to need dredging. I can name them now. Petit Rocher, Pigeon Hill. Why wait for the last minute? Why do you always wait for the season to be opening to do the work when you could be doing it earlier? I'm not saying when the ice is there, but why not move faster? And why not let harbour authorities do the work? There are contractors available. The harbours can use those contractors, so why can't the contractors do the work? I am sure that you could provide support. I have been involved with projects you've approved, so why not use that approach more often, because that would free up resources for you. We work closely with harbour authorities to coordinate spring dredging. The weather is a factor as well. And we also need to conduct assessments to see how much dredging will be needed. All these factors have a great deal of influence on time needed and on the coordination of dredging work in spring. One clarification, just to be certain, you said harbour authorities have clearance of doing calls for tender for up to $90,000. Is that correct? It depends on the scope of the work, yes. And if the type of project is suitable, port authorities do have authorities to contract out up to $90,000 worth if all other conditions are met and there are no issues with getting authorizations and permits, environmental permits. And, of course, there's the Indigenous consultation factor. That, again, depends on the scope of the project.
Thank you, Mr. Cormier. Your time is up. We'll now go to Madame Debienne for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you.
J'ai envie de vous demander qu'est-ce qui...
I'd like to ask you what the main obstacle is, the main obstacle that prevents a bit more predictability from being put in place, a bit what my colleague was asking. On the ground, there are some things that are well known and that some issues that come up every season. I can see that at Île aux Coudres, there's a sand build-up every year and the dredging team has to come. We know this happens. Storms make it worse, so more dredging is needed and the amount of dredging might need to be assessed. But there's dredging to be done and that's known. So how could this be made more predictable. There are things we can't predict in climate change, but the things that we can predict. Is there not a more efficient and effective way of moving ahead so that fishers could be a little more secure and know it will be done? This is not a criticism. I just want to know what more we could do to make these recurrent activities more predictable. If I can begin, and Stephanie will complement. There are, in fact, many things we don't know each year. Certainly the amount of dredging that will be needed for a given harbour, for a given small craft harbour, changes from year to year. Yes, we can predict that dredging will be needed, but given the fact that there are a limited number of companies that provide dredging services, we need to do the assessments each year and to set up a plan each year to ensure that all small craft harbours can be operational and have the services needed for fishers to start the season safely. We've started implementing tools like permanent contracts to make it easier to call them out in emergencies. We'll be able to activate standing offers as needed. That is one of the tools we're using because we are well aware of how complex the issues are. We also work closely with harbour authorities to understand what their experiences have been in the last few years, all of which helps us with predictability.
A little bit over, but not too bad. We'll now go to Ms. Barron for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. So a few of our witnesses also brought up the importance of science as we move forward in better developing extreme weather resilient infrastructure, adapting as required based on changes that we're seeing within our oceans, based on the many impacts of the climate crisis. And I wonder if you could speak a little bit to what you're doing to try to fill some of the gaps that we're currently seeing, some of the deferring science or data that's being acquired, and how that information is being integrated into the steps moving forward on rebuilding for more climate resilient infrastructure.
You know, clearly Canada's not alone in feeling the impacts of climate change and of the severe weather events that many jurisdictions have faced in recent years. And so, you know, certainly we will be looking globally as well to best practices. And as I mentioned, one of the key things that we'll be looking to the engineers who will be developing the plans for rehabilitating the damaged harbors is that they build into that the best practices around climate resilience.
And how about local and Indigenous knowledge? How is that being integrated?
I think that's part of, in the discussions and communications that we have with our harbour authorities, a lot are made up of Indigenous participants as well and members. So, and that is taken into account. All the different information is taken into account and will continue as we go forward.
Perfect. She's given up to 35 because she went a little bit over the last time. That should be an example to members who do go over time frequently. Thank you, Ms. Barron. We'll now go to Mr. Perkins for 5 minutes or less, please. About 1 year going, like. Okay. Clock is running.
Clock's running. Thank you. So I just want to maybe follow up a little more on my last question, which was the severity of the damage on the older wharfs. So I've had small craft harbors in my area have told me in Southwest Nova they need $600 million. So we're a long way from that. And is small craft harbors looking at different in the building? I don't like the building back better term, but in trying to build stronger, more resilient infrastructure, at stronger types of structures other than our sort of traditional wood ones. Because I see on the West Coast they do a lot of steel pylons and floatable concrete decks and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I can start and then I'll pass to you. But certainly, as I mentioned, one of the key things that we're asking in terms of the rehabilitation plans that will be put in place over the coming months is that climate resilience be built into to that. And so 100% we'll be looking to what seems to be working on the West Coast as well as internationally and also certainly seeking the local knowledge that might further benefit the development of those climate resilient plans.
Do you think, and it's probably tough for you here to give a number, if you can maybe provide it in writing later, what would be adequate ongoing financing for the A-base funding in order to ensure that wharfs, small craft harbor wharfs can have long-term capital maintenance planning, which we don't seem to have right now? It's been identified through a couple of reports.
Yeah, I mean, as I mentioned, we're focused right now on assessing the cost of the damage from Hurricane Fiona and putting in place plans to get those wharves that have been severely impacted back online, if you will. To further answer your question, I think we need to provide something in writing.
To Mr. Burns or Ms. Hopper, we've heard testimony in this study so far that there's a lot of divested property out there that's just damaged or destroyed. What's your take on that? Are those harbors going to be just left completely out in the cold, or will you step in to help out those?
So, I mean, it would be a case-specific type question, but what I can say is that there is and I'm going to get the name of the program wrong, but there is the broader disaster relief funding, which goes to the provinces. And then in addition to that, and again, it would be entirely case-specific, and I'm not the expert to speak to that, but there is the other $200 million from the Fiona Relief Fund, which, again, depending on case specifics, I don't want to mislead you, but depending on case specifics, it, I suppose, could also be a pathway.
We also heard some testimony earlier in the week that double breakwaters were found to be very effective. Like the first breakwater took the waves down quite a bit, and then the second breakwater could handle it. As we try to become more resilient, how much would building that proper type breakwater drive up the cost of building?
Well, first, certainly none of us are engineers who have that expertise to know in a given harbor's circumstance whether the approach that you're referring to would have benefit. But in the climate resilience piece, which would include that, is something that we'll be asking the engineers developing the rehabilitation plans to build into the plans. So that would be something that would be looked at through that process that will be undertaken over the coming months.
So if you mentioned earlier that the funding that's there now is just an initial amount of money to try to get things up and running for the upcoming season, correct?
Yeah, that's right. The purpose of that initial investment is the immediate dredging and repair costs, as well as engineering assessments to get a better understanding of any additional repairs that will be needed.
So how do you think...
Thank you, Mr. Small. You're right on the mark. Thank you for ending right on the mark. It's first time yet. We'll now go to Mr. Hardy for 5 minutes or less, please, to finish up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As you're looking at the damage that was done, and we certainly heard from a lot of the witnesses saying that structures that had been around for a while were overwhelmed by the weather that we had during Hurricane Fiona. And I'm just wondering if you've made the observations, your staff have, or perhaps you have some oceanographic science to kind of assess if the weather is coming at us from a different direction now. You know, are we dealing with the changes in currents, for instance, that have driven some of the species that you know, the fishers fish to other areas? And I'm just wondering if, in your assessment and rebuilding of some of the small craft harbors, if you will need to do them substantially differently because, as I say, the currents and the weather is changing on us.
Certainly, building in all of the elements related to climate resilience is something that we'll be aiming to do as we develop the repair plans for the harbors that are most severely impacted. In terms of an answer to the other questions, I don't have an answer for you on that today.
Yeah, I know that kind of came out of left field, but that said, are you in a position, do you have the resources actually to do the kind of assessment as to what the future might look like? You know, because, you know, Fiona's track appeared to be quite different than you'd seen in the past. And I guess it would be helpful to know if that's what the future looks like, or if something else is going to be taking place that will, you know, make a lot of the good work you're trying to do now not work so well if the conditions change on you again.
If I may, I referenced the different climate adaptation tools that are being used and how we're adapting that. So as we're doing our planning and doing the different geological assessments and such, we do draw upon experts that take into consideration the different changes to allow for that, to better predict, I guess, the model to allow so that perhaps something that always existed in the past needs to be rethought in terms of being able to foresee different future events. So that's all part of how we're working to adapt those different tools that our engineering teams are frequently on a daily basis involved in. So.
In some of our earlier testimony, I recall Mr. Perkins mentioning that you know, he has quite a number of small craft harbors up and down his coast, South Shore St. Margaret's. You know, one of those. If this little craft harbor isn't picturesque enough for you, go a few miles down the road, and there's another one. But that does actually beg the question, and it's come up before in the 2019 report on small craft harbors. You know, there's over 800 of them serving the fishing communities now. Do we need to think about rationalizing them, or should we try and fix them all? And who would make that call? So this is your get off the hook subsidiary question here.
We do have currently 973 small craft harbors across the country. A certain number are deemed to be core in terms of essential to the commercial fishing industry, and others would be falling in the category of recreational or perhaps non-essential in terms of whether it's number or they can go to proximity. A divestiture program is a part of the Small Craft Harbors program, and when we are determining or doing our planning, that's certainly a consideration, but again, depending on where it is in the country, depending on if there are neighboring closer harbors that to be able to accommodate such fishers, and the state needed or state of repair for a certain harbor, those are all taken under consideration when determinations are made in terms of the future of said harbor.
You're speaking in the passive voice. Who makes the determination? Who would decide if a small craft harbor is beyond repair and, you know, a decision is made not to make the investment?
We work closely, obviously, with our engineering teams who are in a position to have the skill to assess the state of said asset and to determine whether or not its future use and what would be required, either from a funding perspective or how that would be serving the community in the future as well. So our engineering and our regional teams are there and working again with our harbor authorities on a day-to-day basis.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hardy. There's only 4 seconds left, so that won't give you much to ask a question. You'd probably try and sneak it in only for I give you the signal you were done. I want to say thank you to the officials for appearing either in person or video conference. with the committee today and sharing your knowledge and answering the many questions. I think some of you are back on Friday when the Minister appears on supplementaries at committee, so we'll welcome you back again. I will say one thing to Ms. Hopper, because she mentioned it in her testimony, about the dredging. In the east coast or the eastern part of Newfoundland, they usually let a standing offer go out, and that covers the whole eastern portion of the province. One contractor gets it, but he has to be able to provide that service, and he'll move from one harbour to another as he's needed to do the dredging. They do it on a standing offer. I think it might be, there's a limit on it. It might be $240,000 in total, but he'll do all the dredging until that amount of money runs out, and then it's up to them if they want to reassign it or not. So it seems to work quite well, because you're guaranteed to get your dredging done when it's needed or before the fishing season starts. So again, I just thought I'd add that little bit of information. I think it's put out through Public Works Canada, actually looks after the tendering process, if I'm not mistaken. So again, thank you everyone for another fantastic meeting. Madame Debienne, yes.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, the witness who was unable to connect, Mr. Arsenault, is offering the committee to provide his testimony and is offering us the opportunity to put written questions to which he will answer with written answers. He will provide his testimony to everyone. Thank you.
They'll send it or get the email address or the contact to send it out and get an answer back. So again, meeting adjourned. See you all on Friday.